What's up everybody? I'm Chris, we're here at Rio on Cape Hatteras, and today we're going to show you how to assemble the Liquid Force Happy Foil. The Happy Foil comes complete with its own convenient carry case. Inside the carry case, you'll find your written assembly instructions, your front and back wings, your foil mast, your foil fuselage, and your tools and foil assembly hardware. We recommend assembling the Happy Foil someplace like on a table or an indoor area. There's lots of little bolts that you're going to need to assemble, and you don't want to be dropping any of those in a grassy area or on a deck, so make sure you have a nice clean area to assemble your foil. Start by opening your hardware and tool pack and pulling out your various screws and hardware and laying them out on your assembly area. As you remove your screws from the hardware pouch, you'll find that they're paired in different sizes, and try to organize the screws by size. Now I have my 4 foil to board mounting bolts, 6 foil assembly bolts, and my medium aspect wing shims that go in between the wings and the fuselage. Begin by finding the largest 2 screws in your screw set and using them to attach the fuselage to the bottom of the mast. You'll notice that there are several holes on the side of the fuselage that faces down towards the water, and only 2 holes on the flat side of the fuselage that connects to the mast. Before beginning assembly, orient your mast and figure out which end of your mast faces the nose of the board and which end will face the tail of the board. The narrower, sharper edge of the mast faces towards the tail of the board, and you can also see when you look at the top of the mast, you're going to see one area is shorter and blunter, one area is more pointy and longer. So the sharper, pointier edge is going to be facing towards the tail of your board. To orient your fuselage, the long tail of the fuselage should be pointed back towards the tail of the board. The shorter end of the fuselage should be pointed towards the nose of the board. The side of the fuselage with many holes is the side that's going to face down towards the water. The flat side of the fuselage with only 2 holes is the side that's going to face up towards the board and the side that's going to connect to the mast. Orient your fuselage on the mast with the long tail of the fuselage pointed towards the tail of the board, aligned with the sharp, narrow side of the mast, and use the 2 largest bolts in your foil assembly kit to attach the fuselage to the mast through the 2 center holes in the fuselage. It's usually going to be easier to get these started by hand, and then if you're sure that your foil is balanced, grab your tool and finish working them in. And you'll see that Liquid Force has done a really good improvement on their tool this year. Either side of the tool is going to work. It just depends on when you need leverage or when you'd rather have the tool spin more quickly. When assembling your foil, it's going to be important that everything is nice and tight. Take care to ensure that your tool is properly inserted into the bolt so that you don't strip your screws, and give everything a good, powerful tighten. After the foil is fully assembled, we're going to recommend that you go back one more time and give a good crank on each bolt. It's also a good idea to check your gear and make sure that all your bolts are tight before each and every session. Now we're going to attach the smaller rear wing. Start by taking the rear wing out of the awesome Liquid Force protective case, and orientation with these wings is going to be really important. So you'll notice that the wing has a curvature to it, and also that it kind of has a pointier arrowhead sort of shape. So the pointed end is going to point towards the front of the board, and while this is upside down and we're assembling it this way, the curvature is going to face down, just like that. So there's some graphics on the wing. When the foil is actually in the water, these graphics are going to be facing up towards the board. Be sure that you include the included plastic shims. Those are just going to help your foil wings sit nice and secure on your fuselage. So I'm going to orient this plastic shim. There's a little arrow on it telling me to point it towards the front of the board, and there's a few different holes on the back of this foil to this foil fuselage to make it able to accept different kind of modular wings in the future. Right now, we're going to use the two larger holes that are back towards the end, the tail of the board. So these last two larger holes here. I'm going to take the two smallest screws from my foil hardware kit, orient my wing and my shim so that everything lines up, and I'm going to lightly seat these screws. And be careful as you're putting these bolts in. The foil's not super balanced right now, so just use a light touch and just make sure that you don't knock anything over. Once I have these seated, I'm going to follow up with my tool. Now we're going to repeat the process with the front wing. You're going to use a similar logic for the front wing. You can see that one end is kind of pointed more than the other. And this front wing is actually going to orient the opposite way of the rear wing. So while the rear wing curves down while you're assembling it upside down like this, the curve goes towards the board. The front wing is going to curve up, and in both situations we can double check by making sure that the Liquid Force logos are pointing towards the board. So again, I'm going to grab my plastic shim, orient it towards the front of the board. My remaining two foil hardware assembly screws, which are my medium-sized ones. And again, I'm going to use the last two larger holes on the end of the foil. So these last two larger holes here. Another good way to make sure that you're orienting your foil wing properly is you'll notice that the screws, the bolts are only countersunk on one side. So they're really only going to fit nice and flush on one side of the board. If you went to assemble your foil backwards, you'd notice immediately the bolts aren't going to fit nice and flush there. And again, as I'm tightening everything, just being gentle. The foil's still not balanced enough for you to really lean into it as you're tightening these. Okay, so now we have our foil assembly all put together. The last thing that we need to do before we go session is attach our foil assembly to our foil board. Today we're attaching the Happy Foil assembly to a Liquid Force Rocket Fish foil board. I'm going to start with these 4 assembly bolts that go in the track mounting system, and I'm going to just thread these washers onto the end of each bolt lightly, and then use the bolt kind of as a handle to seat these washers in the tracks. And I'm just going to end up putting one bolt on each far end of the track for now. The first time that you're assembling your foil, we recommend that you set up your foil mast directly in the center of your mounting track. There's some play in this mounting track. You can move the mast towards the nose or tail of the board, but when you're first riding the board, it's going to be best to set the mast up right in the center so you have a good baseline, and then after a few sessions you can make some adjustments to see the different feels. Now that we have our mounting bolts in the board, I'm going to take my black plastic assembly plate. It has a marking on it with the arrow front, so I'm going to face that towards the front of the board, and the little side with the arrow is going to go down towards the board. And I'm going to line this up so that it's centered with the 2 centers of my mounting boxes here. Now I'm going to take my foil. I'm going to double check that I'm putting it on with the correct orientation, with the large wing in the front, the small wing in the back, and the long tail of the fuselage going towards the back of the board. I'm going to line up my spacer base plate, the plastic one, and my blue metal base plate mounting bracket. And then I'm going to go ahead and just slide in the bolts that I started setting up earlier. I want to take pains to kind of just slightly lift and make sure that that washer is seated directly beneath that bolt and that everything is nice and snug, seated as good as it can be and as far as it can be pushed into that mounting area. Once I've got my bolt situated, I'm going to start tightening everything down, and especially with this part of the board, it's going to be a great idea to loosely tighten each bolt first until you're just starting to feel some good resistance. And I like to do it in a crisscross pattern so that everything tightens down evenly. And after the bolts are gently tightened, I'm going to go back around to each bolt and give it a good solid torque to make sure that it's firmly tightened. And the great thing about this tool is I can really use this long handle to get some good leverage and get that last crank down to make sure my foil is really tight. Okay, so now your happy foil is completely assembled. You're almost ready to ride. Last step is going to be go around, give a good wiggle at all the attachment points, and make sure that all the pieces of your foil are firmly secured. We recommend before starting each session checking to ensure that all of your bolts are firmly tightened. If you're using foot straps on your foil board, you can choose the pattern that you want to mount them in and assemble them using the bolt holes on the deck of the board. Now your happy foil is fully assembled and you're ready to go shred. At the end of your session, if you don't want to fully disconnect your foil, you do have the option of putting some protection on your wings with the included happy foil wing covers. All you're going to need to do is gently slip these wing covers over the wings, close the Velcro closures, and you can attach your clip there. And now your foil is looking good, nice and protected, and ready for the next session. You can learn more about kiteboarding foil boards and all the Liquid Force foil products at realwatersports.com/foil or call us at 252-987-6000.